So I've got a brand new release out today, and actually it started live 4 years ago as a bootleg, but it's come on a bit since then, and I thought today I'd talk you through how I made my track Told You So. So towards the end of 2018, Rudimental came out with a track called Summer of Love featuring Rita Ora, and I managed to make an a cappella from it, a DIY a cappella, and I made my own edit from it. So as I say, I made that edit in 2018 and I played it out probably a few times, but to be honest, the vocal didn't sound that great because it was a DIY a cappella. It didn't sound that clean and I didn't like playing it out so much. So it kind of just sat on my hard drive. And just recently I was going through my hard drive for all different tracks that I hadn't finished and just seeing what ideas I had on there. And then I picked this one out and I thought, maybe I can do something with this one. And with a little bit of work and a brand new vocal, it's now my track Told You So. If you want to get hold of the track, I'll put a link underneath this video. It's on all major streaming platforms right now. There's a download exclusive on Traxsource, and 2 weeks later, it'll be on all major platforms. Hit the link down below if you want to get hold of it. Now, when I did that bootleg, the only thing I was actually using from the original track was the a cappella, the actual vocal. So really, once I stripped that away, everything else was my own track, my own music, my own drums, everything else like that is my own thing. So I thought, well, why not? Why not make it into a track? So I kind of got rid of all the bits that weren't kind of working. I sped it up a little bit and then started work on the actual production of it. So let's jump into the original project, the actual bootleg. Yeah, I thought as much. There's a whole load of things missing from this because it's 4 years ago I produced this and I've since moved machine. So I kind of assumed there'll be a few things missing from there. You can also see from here, if you've watched any of my recent videos, I'm a whole lot more organized than I used to be. God, that's all over the place, color-wise, grouping-wise, everything. Now, the original tempo is 123 BPM, which is a little bit too slow for what I play now. So I bumped that right up to 128. And there's also a whole lot of elements in there that are kind of a bit slower. So for example, the held organ. I knew I was probably going to get rid of that one. However, one thing I knew I wanted to keep was the Rhodes piano. I just love that. Just that dreamy, wonderful, warm sound. You can see in there how I've offset the notes in the chord just to give that kind of glide kind of feel, that kind of nice, warm kind of trickle into the chord. Also, another thing I wanted to take from the original bootleg was the actual chopped up chords as well. So I took that same Rhodes piano and did some chopped up chords, but I wanted it to kind of glide. I kind of wanted it to bend almost. So I actually bounced it as audio and then did a automation on the transposition. So it kind of transposes down. So you can see here, it's actually going from its original transposition, which is 0, down 5 semitones, just to kind of glide into the next chord. But then I've got the next chord here, so I can go back up to 0 again. Just a really kind of cheap and dirty way of doing it. Right, so back into the final track project, and this one is so much better organized. I've got my drums at the top, my bass group, my music group, which has got all the musical elements, the Rhodes, the strings, everything else like that, the vocals, and then I got the effects down the bottom. So as I say, I wanted to keep those Rhodes in there, but I've actually changed out the instrument. The original instrument was the Velvet, which I've still got in here, but it's disabled at the moment. And what I've done is I've used Analog Lab instead. So instead of the Rhodes being played through the Velvet, I've actually got it going through the DX7. It just had a kind of more bell-like kind of quality to it that I really liked, and I thought it would work quite nicely in the mix. I also then have a pad behind it, which again is coming from the Analog Lab, and this time it's coming from the Synth Clavier. It's just a really kind of simple pad that kind of fills that kind of background mix. Exactly the same chords, just in a kind of more pad-like kind of sound, and put them both together, they kind of have this lovely warm kind of swelling kind of feel. They're all being filtered in at the start. I just love the sound of those two instruments together. And actually I've got RC20 on that DX7 just to kind of give it more of a vintage kind of feel. So we've got some vinyl noise kind of coming in there, and also a little bit of a low and an upper cut, just to kind of, yeah, make it sound a little bit less clean. I do still have those Rhodes stabs in there from the original though. In fact, that Rhodes stab sample is about the only sample that's actually made it from the original bootleg that I haven't tweaked. I've kind of EQ'd it a little bit better to fit within the mix, but pretty much every other element within the track I have kind of gone over. I've kind of replaced it. I've kind of made it better. So let's have a look at the drums and I'll show you what I've done with those. So one of the first things I did when I started making this new version of this track was actually increase the BPM from 123 to 128. I kind of wanted to give it more of a kind of garagey kind of feel, which meant actually making the drums shorter. So they were quite long in the original version because it's 123. You want to kind of fill out that space. The drum samples would be a little bit longer, but with that kind of, for that kind of garagey kind of feel, I needed kind of short, sharp kind of drums. So there's a whole load of layers here. The first thing obviously is that kick, which actually is two layers. So I've got a sub layer here, and then I've also got a top layer of that kick. The top layer just gives it that kind of crunch, whereas that bottom layer gives it that kind of thump. On top of that, then, of course, I've got my claps and my hats and snares. Now, I tend to use top loops quite a bit. So I'll find loops, drum loops, and kind of cut bits out of them. So I've got a clap here. It's kind of a clap and a snare all kind of rimmed together. You can see here that it actually looks like it's got a hat in there. But if you go into the automation, the gain automation within here, you can see I'm actually only using a clap within there. And that's kind of how I do most of my drums. I usually find loops and cut bits out of them and kind of do it that way. I like constructing my beats that way. And then I've got another clap to layer that up. Very kind of snappy kind of clap. Then we move on to the hats. I've got an open hat in there. And then also a closed hat. I've actually got another hat layer down the bottom here. It's got that kind of open hat ride kind of feel, which it gives it that kind of jazziness, almost like that kind of, that garage kind of feel. And I've also got some snares here as well. It's basically just 3 snare samples that I've put on the 16th just to kind of give it that kind of garage kind of swing. And it all kind of works together like this. So at that point I had my drums and the Rhodes. In the original bootleg, I actually had a real bass in there, like an electric bass. But I knew in this kind of garagey kind of remake, I wanted something a bit more subbier. So I actually turned to the sub. I do love the sub. It's such a great instrument. I use it on as my bass on so many of my tracks. And in this case, I'm actually using a kind of 808 kind of sample. And if I solo it together with the Rhodes, you kind of see that the bass plays most of the notes that the Rhodes does, but then it also has a few skippiness in it. And if I solo the bass and the Rhodes together, you'll kind of hear that they play very much similar notes, but the bass has a few more in there, a few more kind of skippy notes in there almost. I got some 16ths in there just to kind of give it a little bit more movement within that bass. And because it's an 808, you kind of get that kick, that almost kind of percussion sound as well. So it has that movement to it. It's got most of the processing that I usually do on most of my tracks. However, I have got Spectre within here, which is a kind of saturator. And it just allows me to get a little bit more kind of upper harmonics out of that sub bass, because usually sub bass is obviously quite low. You're not going to hear it so much. So I've actually got Spectre adding some tape kind of saturation just to get some of those upper frequencies coming through. It works in a kind of subtle way, but it kind of adds that little extra 10% to it. And really that was most of the track. I already kind of had it arranged out anyway because of the bootleg that I made before to fit to that original kind of DIY acapella that I had. But obviously I didn't have any vocals, so I went searching trying to find a vocal that fit. I actually found this vocal on Splice, and one of my cheat codes for finding vocals on Splice and making them sound a little bit different is actually searching for vocals in a different key. Usually I will look for vocals 3 semitones up and then pitch them down 3 semitones and bring them into my track. However, I was actually using Splice Bridge, the plugin that works with your DAW and gets Splice to kind of play the samples from Splice in time with your DAW, and that will actually pitch vocals for you. So actually I found a vocal that was pitched up 1 semitone, so it was actually in A minor, and I kind of thought that worked quite nicely. It was actually previewing at 1 semitone down, and it just sounded really great within my track. So this is the original vocal.
Now they're gonna say I told you so. Now you're gonna hear I should have known, 'cause you showed who you were.
So that's actually at 94 BPM in A minor. I took that down a semitone and then obviously increased the speed to 128. And this is what you get.
Now they're gonna say I told you so. Now you're gonna hear I should have known, 'cause you showed who you were. And now I'm hurt. Now I'm hurt.
I do tend to find a lot of my vocals within the kind of R&B kind of packs. I like that kind of more soulful kind of sound. And I know it is pitching up quite a bit from 94 BPM to 128. That's a big jump, but it sounded all right. It worked okay. I've got it on the complex warping algorithm on Ableton, and it just seemed to work. Of course, I do have some processing going on within there. I've got a little bit of EQing going on there. I've got an echo going on there. By the way, echo, the standard default Ableton echo, is brilliant. I use it all the time, and in fact it's my go-to delay, to be honest. I've got Soothe doing its magic because there were some kind of problem kind of resonances coming through around about the 3,500 mark. And I also have the amazing Split EQ. I love this plugin so much. It is an EQ, but it can actually split away the transients from the tonal. So it is basically a transient shaper and EQ kind of put into one. So you can actually get rid of some of the transients and bring through the tonal, which works great for vocals, especially this vocal. For example, I have this shelf going on here where I'm scooping out some of the top transients. You can see how here I've got this kind of cut here in this shelf that is actually taking away the transients. However, I am boosting the tonals. You can see these are linked together. Now what this is doing is it's taking away the transients, so the S's and the T's and things like that. However, I'm boosting the tonal kind of frequencies of that vocal, so you're bringing back some of that high end again. I honestly don't know how it works. It's some kind of black magic, but it is brilliant. And then I'm doing the opposite in the kind of lower mids here, where I'm kind of scooping out some of the tonal, so taking away some of those kind of resonant kind of frequencies within the vocal, but then I'm boosting the transients here to kind of bring back some of that presence again. Again, this plugin is just amazing. It's so good. So that is kind of my main vocal in the breakdowns, and actually I've kind of got a double of it as well. Now obviously if you had a singer with you, you'd record a double, but basically what I've done is I've duplicated this and I've actually pitched it down minus 13 semitones. This is down 1 semitone, so I'm basically knocking this down an octave from that, and it just kind of thickens it up a little bit in that breakdown.
Now they're gonna say I told you so. Cause you showed who you were, and now I'm hurt, now I'm hurt.
And I found that worked just brilliantly in the track.
Now they're gonna say I told you so. Now you're gonna hear I should have known. Cause you showed who you were, and now I'm hurt, now I'm hurt.
So that vocal worked great in the breakdown, but I kind of wanted to echo what I was doing with those Rhodes. So in the breakdowns, I'm kind of making the Rhodes all nice and long, and then when it gets to the drop, they're all kind of choppy, and I kind of want to do the same thing with the vocal. Now, usually when I'm looking to do vocal chops, I will use Ableton's inbuilt feature to chop an audio sample automatically into its transients and then play it across the MIDI keyboard. However, I tried that with this one and it wasn't kind of getting the results that I wanted to. So I kind of got down and dirty and literally just took the audio sample and started cutting it and pasting it and kind of just trying different combinations. And this is kind of what I came up with.
But you were told you so. And I hear a shush to me. But you were told you so. Who's to me, yeah. But you were told you so. And I hear a shush to me. But you were told you so. But you were, yeah.
And it's all that original sample. I haven't used anything else. I've just used that original sample that I've got in the main breakdown and literally gone through and found kind of interesting little loops and things that I could use within the track. Now, because I want these chop vocals to sound different from the breakdown vocals, I've kind of done some different processing on them. So the first thing is a bit of harsh EQing. So I've really got some of the bottom end out of those vocals. And I've also kind of taken a little bit of the top end with a little notch of resonance in there, just to make it sound a bit more like almost like a radio speaker, but not quite as harsh as that. So kind of making it sound a little bit different. And because they're chops, I want them to sound more almost percussion like or musical like rather than actually vocals. So I've actually got auto tune on there in a very kind of subtle setting, but it kind of just, it makes them fit within that scale. So it's the track is in G sharp minor, and that kind of auto tune makes sure that all of those kind of syllables, all the different cuts are all within that scale. They should be anyway because the vocal is sung within that scale, but I just wanted to make sure it kind of really fit within there to make it feel a little bit more robotic, a bit more musical. I've also got the Volve compressor on there, which really kind of makes things sound a little bit more crunchy, a little bit more kind of old school like almost. This kind of replicates those kind of old school samplers, and I really love this compressor. I've got a bit of Soothe in there, just taking some of the harshness out of those highs. I've got a bit of reverb in there as well, just to make it kind of fit more within the mix. And I've got like a 42% dry to wet there. So basically what it's doing is it's got 42% of the wet signal and then the rest is the dry. So it's kind of pushing it back almost. And I kind of want that from those chops. I've also got a bit of chorus going over the top here. Again, I want this to sound less like the original vocal. I want it to not sound as clean. So I've got just a bit of chorus on there. Definitely makes it a little bit wider, but it's a case of kind of really differentiating it between the main vocal. Then I got a bit of side chaining and I've got the imager in there as well, just to kind of really push it out a bit wider as well. I just want it to feel like it fits nicely within the mix. And then a bit of fresh air on the end there, which just gives a bit of the highness left, because I kind of get rid of some of that highs with EQ like early on in the processing chain. I wanted to bring some of those highs back, and I kind of go between the main vocal and those chop vocals throughout the track. For example, there's a bit here where I kind of have the main vocal in here, but where we've got the gaps of the main vocal, I'm filling it in with the chops that I've got already. And that's pretty much all the elements of the track. A bit later on in the breakdown, I introduce a kind of Reese bass in there, just to kind of give that nice kind of almost that weight to the breakdown.
heard. Now they're gonna say I told you so. Now you're gonna hear I should have known. 'Cause you should. I'm hurt.
It's just a kind of subtle thing, but it really fills out those lows, especially in the breakdown, just works really nicely. And really that's kind of mostly it. I've got some effects going on in the background here, just like white noise rises, a bit of atmosphere going on within here, kind of textures basically in the breakdown. And then I've got a kind of almost a trademark kind of vinyl scratch in there as well. It's something I usually put within my tracks somewhere. And that just kind of, again, it's almost like at the fill at the end of a bar. It just kind of just pushes it into the next bar. And that's really kind of how I put the track together. As I say, it started out life as a bootleg 4 years ago, and it's almost a lesson in don't chuck things away, because you never know where they might come in handy in the future. It was one of those things that was just sitting on my hard drive as a bootleg. It was never going to go anywhere as a bootleg, but it was one of those things that was sitting around where pretty much every element apart from the vocal was my own kind of original work. So just switching out that vocal made it into a brand new track for myself. Yes, I went over everything in the track. I redid everything in kind of minute detail. I only kind of looked at every single element and making every single element better. But really the fundamental idea started right at the start there. And generally that's kind of how I come up with a lot of my ideas. They end up sparking from something else I'm doing. So I might be making a bootleg of something else and I might come up with a certain sound and I'd be like, that would be really nice for an original track. So this is just one of those circumstances where something that I did a long time ago suddenly came around and I thought, you know, this might make a nice track.
Right now, I'm gonna bring it back to the funk.